Welcome to the Shield Your Business from Chaos podcast, where there's no building, no people, no third-party suppliers, and no systems all combined to create Chaos the Dragon, which is battled by King Phoenix and his shield.
Hi, I'm Roswitha Firth, and welcome to the Kingsbridge BCP podcast, where we talk about all things BCP. I've been in business continuity since about the year 2000, and I've known Skip Williams for many years, and I'd like to let him go ahead and introduce himself.
Hi, it's Skip Williams, co-founder of Kingsbridge BCP, and have been in the field of business continuity since about 2000, but been around it since 1983 as my dad was doing it when I was just a wee guy.
Just a wee
Yeah, 1983.
wee lad,
in,
lad.
In 1983, I was 10. So yeah, I wasn't being too useful to business continuity planning then.
All right. So last week we talked about using Word for your business continuity planning. There's certainly some benefits like cost. There's also some drawbacks, which we started covering, but we decided that the topic needed a little bit more to truly give our audience kind of the benefit of.
Oh, your audio just cut out. There you go, you back.
Did I freeze?
Yeah, no, your audio went out.
Did I freeze?
No, your audio stopped. Or was it
My
mine?
audio stopped. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry about that. All right, I had already turned off everything, but let me turn off whatever.
Even more stuff.
Yeah. Okay, where is my do not disturb button? Let's add that to the mix and see what happens. Okay. Yeah, it interrupted for a phone call, which I didn't think it should.
Oh.
Apologies for that.
Oh.
Okay, so we decided that there was more to cover about whether or not using Word for your BCP is a good idea. And by Word, I really mean kind of like Word and Excel, because there's some supporting documentation that a lot of people will do in Excel. So we talked a lot about kind of the actual building of your plan and the challenges of Microsoft templates and getting people to kind of utilize those to keep things organized. What we didn't talk about as much was how would you do your plan maintenance and updates using Word? And we also want to go a little bit deeper into when you distribute your plan, who gets to see it, who gets to see what, and how do you control that? And compare Word to using other tools kind of in general. So, Skip, what is your biggest beef with using Microsoft Office, Word, Excel for plan maintenance? Because that's a really specific thing with very specific goals.
I think that probably the hardest part with using Word for doing things like plan maintenance and everything along those lines is that it's really, really hard to do. Well, version control with it is next to impossible because everybody can have access to it, and you can't really stop Word documents from disappearing, being stuffed onto thumb drives and everything, this, whatever. And you never really know what version they're actually accessing whenever they're pulling it up, because they might have an old copy of it. It's just not easy to manage and to maintain it from any like rational perspective. The other thing as well is that if you've got changes to be made to your plan, like the one that we probably get most frequently, and it's odd that you would think this, but when you've got like somebody's email address, so like I'm Skip W and then @ and then the URL, and so that whenever companies change their name or they change their email formats, those URLs inevitably always change. And so if you have 150, 250, 1,000, 1,500 URLs that you have to change that are scattered wherever through the entire plan, trying to change all of those so that they make sense is difficult. Now, I know somebody would say, oh, well, the URL, you can just do a find and replace. And I'm like, yeah, but if you're using ours, it's company name is Kingsbridge, our URL is Kingsbridge BCP. If I search for just Kingsbridge, I'm going to be changing the company name all over the place. But if I'm changing just Kingsbridge BCP, well, that's fine. But if there's Kingsbridge BCP referenced anywhere else in the plan, i.e., like on a link going to a file, then it's going to change it there as well. And so it's really one of those things where you'd have to change it and then do an awful lot of editing to make sure that it's actually correct. The other one is as well is that even if they're not changing the URL part, that they're changing the format in front of the ad. So like I'm skip W, but if it was then skip W turned into skip.williams, then that causes a humongous pain. Because if I go looking for just skip, now if I'm going from skip W to something else, skip W is relatively unique. But if I had skip.williams and I went looking for skip.williams everywhere, and I've got 150 people in the company, I have to do that
150 times.
Yeah.
You brought up so many things I want to comment on.
Okay.
So I'm gonna interject at this point before I forget exactly what I wanted to say. So
we'll be back with that solution after a brief message from our sponsor, Kingsbridge BCP.
Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsbridgeBCP.com.
all excellent points, and I definitely agree. Going back to the version control part and why that is so difficult, even if I just want to add on to that, even if you're using something like SharePoint, for example, and everybody is supposed to be accessing their plans through SharePoint, yeah, there's always a thumb drive. There's always somebody's printed a copy and it hangs around and isn't properly shredded or whatever when the time comes. From my own personal experience, I can absolutely agree 100% that that is really challenging because you can't get, unless you're the only plan builder. So here's the exception. If you are the only plan builder, you can ignore what we just said. If there's any more than like one, maybe two people touching it, if you've got plan builders out in the departments, for example, then yeah, it's awful because there's only so much that you can train them on. Because most likely they're only touching the plan a couple times a year. Let's say they have to touch it quarterly, which I think is kind of ambitious because that doesn't usually happen.
No, never happens.
It's I've seen it once. Every other time you touched it either twice a year or annually, mostly annually. So you've got 27 people in your company, just for an example, updating their plans once a year. In any given year, it's almost guaranteed that there's going to be a personnel change in those 27 people. So you, number one, have to train somebody, and then you have to keep everybody trained and remind them that like you can only access this plan through SharePoint, and you have to use Word track changes, and you have to like identify yourself by your initials, and only one person is going to accept edits. And those are all really difficult things to implement consistently. Number two, number two, what was the second thing that you were talking
about? Email changes.
Oh, email changes. Yes. So the find and replace thing, I have a lot of personal experience with that gem from having to use Word at companies that chose not to use a tool of some kind. And even if you have all of your data, whatever it is, in Excel spreadsheets, and you're really good at Excel, and you can filter and sort and find and replace with the best of them, I can tell you from personal experience, the amount of proofreading that you have to do to make sure that the data that you're going to like relink to in Word is actually accurate is, I'm not talking 2 to 3 hours of work. I'm talking I'm talking about like you could easily spend an entire 40-hour work week just on the proofreading part of the job.
Yeah.
And that's insane. Like,
Yeah.
that's crazy making, because anytime you're interrupted, you kind of have to refind everything and like make sure you're doing the right thing, and that you don't get so distracted by, oh, this is wrong over here. I need to mark that so that I find it when I get to that point in the process, and then you come back to where you're at. Like, it's really crazy making. I don't do it. I don't recommend it. So those are my 2 points of feedback based on personal experience, about some of the real challenges if you're going to use Microsoft Office for your plan building.
Yeah.
We'll be back with that solution after a brief message from our sponsor, Kingsbridge BCP.
Use King Phoenix and Shield with its mapping, its dashboards, its permissioning, its dependency mapping, and its automatically redacted plans to shield your business from chaos. KingsbridgeBCP.com.
So, plan maintenance. I don't know if there's anything else that you want to add on plan maintenance before we move on to kind of the second half of our topic today.
It sort of goes down that same rabbit hole of like just trying to keep things current and up to date and everything like that, or whatever, and having it such that it reflects your business. Because what we do with Shield is that you write it through a browser. You can do it on your phone, but War and Peace is not being written on your phone. But so it's designed really to be done through a laptop, desktop, something along those lines. But we have it such that you get a read-only copy on your phone, and it becomes local on your phone, and it's just pushed out. And as the users, they don't have to do anything. It just, they don't even realize that it's there. It just happens, and they just get it. And so it goes back to that whole version control, is that as long as they're accessing it through their phone, through the app on their phone, they always have the latest copy of the plan. Always, 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 always. So as the plan builder or plan builders, you know that they're always going from what you've said. And there's a word that gets used in the office here a lot, is the single source of truth. And so what we're trying to do in all of this is have a single source of truth so that you can do your recovery in an orderly manner, as opposed to just ad hoc, willy-nilly all over the place and saying, oh, but I'm using the plan. And you're like, yeah, written in 2003. And you're like, well, that's the latest one I have. And you're like, well, that's now bad because you've gone completely 180 degrees in the wrong direction.
Okay, so you're saying that even if somebody hasn't like updated their phone, that they're always going to get pushed the most current version.
Always.
Okay, so anybody out there who is evaluating tools to see if they're fit for use for your company's purposes, that's something to look at. I would expect at this point that most tools would do the same thing, but it's not guaranteed. So you really want to check that out, because that is important. If people are operating from different versions of your plan, unless it literally doesn't change ever from year to year, then that's a problem.
Yeah. Yep, for sure.
Good. All right. So let's talk a little bit more about when you distribute the plan, who can see what, and how do you control that? Is there a way to control it in Microsoft Word? Yeah, I mean, there is, and it's kind of manual, but we can talk about that for a minute and then talk about kind of like what a tool can benefit you.
Yeah, I think if you're doing it in Word, like you said, you can do it. It can be done, but it's generally a very manual process. And so that's just yet another thing to add onto your to-do list when it comes to actually managing the plan and who gets to see it, who gets to see what. And
So for people who do want to do that, though, sorry to interrupt, but for people who like are stuck with Word because management has said so or whatever, let's talk about like a few practical steps about how to do that in a reasonably efficient way, because you've got to consider who your stakeholders are. So you've got senior management, you've got your steering committee for your BCP program. Those might be the same people and they might not be. And they would presumably need slightly different levels of information. Then you have anybody on the BCP team, and then you have any plan builders out in the departments, and then you have any like users of the plan, which may or may not be everybody in the company, depending on your company.
Yeah.
So that's at least, at bare minimum, you're looking at probably 3 different groups of stakeholders, up to 5 groups, let's say. So yeah, that gets challenging, even if you're only talking about 3 different groups of stakeholders. Okay, so maybe your execs/steering committee get a 2-page summary. That could go on the front of your plan, and when the execs get it, they only get the first 2 pages, saved to a PDF and emailed or put in a repository somewhere. Then you have your BCP team, if you have an actual BCP team, not just you, and you would see everything, so there'd be nothing redacted. And then you would have plan builders out in the business units who, depending on how your company handles access to information, possible that they can all see most of it, but in a lot of companies, it'll be siloed by department or function. So all the accounting finance people get access to everything except for the fact that there's always that payroll thing, right?
Yeah.
That's usually pretty locked down information about that. And anywhere in finance where there are like routing numbers, that's eyes only for the people that perform that function or their superiors. That gets challenging. And then you have sort of a read-only copy of the general stuff. If you're going to use Word, though, you have to, before you ever start anything, plan building, you have to structure your plan so that if you need to exclude portions, that you have some kind of a reasonable way of doing that. And the more complicated your plan, the harder it is to do.
Well, and the thing is that like, and I'm just going back to how we do it with Shield, and I'm not making it such that it's the end all and be all, because it's not designed for the end all and be all for
Everybody.
everybody.
But yeah.
But the way that it pretty much works is that Shield writes the plan such that your plan is in essence like a series of chapters, and each chapter is related to a team, which is related to a business unit. So using accounting and finance, for example, depending on the size of the company, those are generally 2 different teams. So they would then be 2 different chapters. So for the finance chapter, we give the finance people access to that chapter. For the accounting people, we give them access to the accounting chapter. If you're the auditors or the the plan admins or senior management or whatever, so this, you want to see all those chapters all in some, it doesn't really have to be in an organized manner, but it's, each chapter for each individual team. I have yet to see how to be able to do it in Word such that you can write it such that you've got chapters in your plan. That's one single document that you can see permissions to one and not permissions to the other and everything of that back and forth. You just can't.
Yeah, you have to, you have to like selectively create a PDF with a custom range of pages. So like page 1 to 2. And then for every chapter theme, you would then need to choose to save to your PDF only the pages that apply to them. If you only have 3 teams, maybe doable. 17 teams, probably not so much.
Well, and then the thing is with that is that even if you're starting from a single Word document to build all of your chapters, well, you're starting from a single Word document. Every one of your teams has to have a separate Word document so that they can be editing their own sections. And then you've got to pull them all together to create that one big, huge document, because if you want to share your entire plan with anybody, you got to pull it all together. And so the thing is that managing that, I guess, association and disassociation, and you're just like, holy
It
smokes.
really just kind of gives you a headache. So SharePoint can help a little bit with that, but again, it requires a lot of effort on the part of the BCP person actually like doing the documentation. Because in SharePoint you can restrict access. So hypothetically speaking, you could use that team access restriction in SharePoint to limit the actual documents that people had access to. But again, that gets really administratively heavy on one person or a very small team to keep that up to date and accurate and not accidentally let somebody see something they're not supposed to. So a tool that redacts, whether it's Shield or something else, makes your life so much simpler.
Well, and that one has I guess a couple of points on it. One is that, and I realize saying never is really dangerous because inevitably somebody has done something that contradicts the never statement.
Yeah.
I have very seldomly, i.e., close to never, have seen a BCP written using SharePoint that's actually not a giant rat's nest of a mess. Like, it's always a giant SHIT show. You can't figure out where anything is or how anything works or gets there or whatever. And it was a partner of ours that said this. He said, using SharePoint to write your BCP is like using a spoon to cut your steak.
Oh, I love that analogy.
And I
Yeah.
was like, yep. Because you know what? For document management and all the other stuff that SharePoint's great for is like cereal. So yeah, your spoon is amazing because equally
Yeah.
trying to eat your cereal with a knife doesn't work so hot. But it's just like writing your BCP, is that doing a BCP isn't SharePoint, and it just doesn't work. And then when you talked about redacted, is that so there's a function in Shield where what you can do is you can just say make this information such as redacted, and literally it is a radio button that you click, and so that when you present the plan or you output the plan, to give it to an auditor, to give it to a third party, to give it to like a vendor, or sorry, a client or anything like that, it takes all of the information and it redacts it. It's like black magic markered out the different portions of your plan that you don't want to share with anybody, that's viewed as too sensitive. And you can do that such that it takes out people's email addresses, phone numbers, addresses, like home addresses, their first name, their last name, you name whatever, tickles your fancy, you can just do it. And it's just literally one button. And it's anytime I look at that, I'm like, oh, can I imagine trying to do that on a 300 to 400 page Word document? Oh, sure, you're right. If it's that's what you have to do because you can only work with Word, that's fine. But I would, at that point, I would almost challenge you to take your hourly rate, like your not even rate, but just take your annual salary divided by 2,000 roughly work hours in a year, divide by 2,000, multiply by the number of hours you waste doing the simple functions like that, and you'd pay for your BCP tool in no time. Like it's I just can't imagine doing it that way because it's so antiquated, so hard, so labor intensive. It just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I've several times been stuck in that situation. And it didn't matter whether it was 5 years ago or 20 years from ago, it was equally difficult.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, if you're stuck with Word because you cannot get budget or buy-in for it, possibly because of a bad tool implementation previously, which happens unfortunately more frequently than you think, then it is what it is. And hopefully we've given you a couple of ideas about how to kind of make the best use of Word and avoid some of the pitfalls of it. But hopefully what you get out of this is, oh my gosh, if I can possibly get a tool, it will make my life so much easier. And hopefully you can use some of what we've said last week and today to go back to who's ever controlling the purse strings to say, this is all the things that we can get if we shop smart for a tool. And then, of course, do your research. And there's plenty of resources on the web to help you do that research. So, did you want to go ahead and say something else?
No, I'm just saying that, yes, it's possible to do it with Word. However, not elegant in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us. We hope you got a lot out of this little mini series on using Word versus a tool for building your BCP plan. And we hope you'll join us next time. You can find us wherever you find your podcast.
And actually, one quick add-on. Got notice yesterday from YouTube that we are now at youtube.com/ at like the, I guess, shift 2 or ampersand or whatever, at Kingsbridge BCP So if you look for us now on YouTube, it's youtube.com/@KingsbridgeBCP. They've made the
Nice.
URL is much cleaner now. It's much prettier. It's like, so much easier to use. So
And don't forget to add us to your favorite podcast.
exactly.
Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.